All right, welcome to today's session. I'm working on a class project. We're collaborating together to create a vampire-based card game, combat game similar to Slay the Spire. We are using Synty assets for our 3D models, and right now I'm working on a enemy spawner. So here in the scene, if I make this a little bit bigger, we've got an enemy here, and this is under our encounters, encounter 1. And we have this collision box. And so if the player enters the box, then it's going to trigger combat. Inside this, there is a single enemy, the light skeleton here. And the code will detect how many enemies there are inside the box. And so then when you enter combat, you'll get the appropriate number of little UI elements saying that you've got 1 enemy in combat or you've got 3 enemies in combat. And they'll show their health bars right over here on the screen. And then that's dynamically counted based on just how many of these entries are underneath encounter 1. So encounter 2, there are 3 here, 1 light skeleton, 2 light skeleton, and then a heavy skeleton. So we can see that encounter right here. Now this is a way to do it, but this doesn't support scalability. If we want to make changes to the difficulty on the enemies, or we want to change the number of enemies that are in there, then we have to go in and we have to manually edit this information. And there's no real replayability this way. The player playing the level will always experience the same number of enemies with the same stats every time they play the game. So what I'm working on doing is converting that into a more dynamic procedural content generation type system where when the game loads, this encounter box will serve as an enemy spawner. And we'll have some variables over here that we can set, and those will determine what types of enemies are allowed to be spawned at this location, modifications to their health or how much damage they cause. And so then that way, every time you play the game, you get a little bit of randomness, a little bit of variability going on, which will greatly increase the replayability of the level. So I've already done some work on this. If I pop up the code here, I have set up an enemies JSON file, and this is where we're defining the stats for the enemies. So we have a skeleton with a brief description. How much armor can the skeleton have, a minimum and a maximum? How much health, also minimum, maximum. How much damage can they inflict? Strength, speed, these are just little placeholder values. Favored action. So in this game, enemies have basically 3 abilities. They can heal themselves, they can buff themselves, increasing their armor, or they can attack the player. And so the skeleton will prefer to attack. Self-preservation isn't a big deal to a skeleton. It just wants to kill, kill, kill. So it's going to prefer to attack. That doesn't mean that it will always attack. That just means that the attack probability will be increased for that favored action. And then I have a path to the skeleton prefab, because if we're going to be spawning these into the game, we need to know what the prefab is. Now I'm going to make a couple minor tweaks here. The health for a skeleton minimum should be 5, and the maximum should be 15. And then a skeleton flesh will have a minimum health of 10 and a maximum health of 20. And then a skeleton light armor will have, and actually down here, armor, I am going to change this to 0 on a skeleton, and then 0 and 0 on the skeleton flesh. Maybe I'll give it a 1. So, no, 0. It doesn't have any armor. It's got flesh, but flesh is nothing. Skeleton light armor, though, will have a 3 to a 6, and then health will be the same as a regular skeleton, 5 and 15. And then the skeleton light or heavy armor will be, let's go with a minimum of 5 and a maximum of 10. And then the health will be, let's go with 10 and 20. Similar to that of the skeleton flesh. And I'm not going to worry about the rest of the enemies right now because I just need enough data to test this out with. In terms of damage, minimum 3 and 5. And let's keep the skeleton flesh at the same, 3 to 5 damage. The skeleton light armor will get slightly more damage at 4 to 6, and the skeleton heavy armor will get slightly more at 5 to 7. Cool, I'm happy with that. And they're all preferred is attack, that's fine. So now we have our data set up. Let me just save that. Now we have our data set up so that we can better test our system as we are running through it. Now, this information gets loaded into enemy scriptable objects. And so here is our scriptable object for our enemy. And missed closing out my comment here. There we go. So I will save that. And the scriptable object just allows me to spawn our code will create a bunch of scriptable objects using this definition based on the data that is in the JSON file. So if I need to make a change to an enemy stats, I just change the data in the JSON file and then rerun my importer. The importer is this enemy loader window C# script over here. And so this thing just runs through, it creates a tool in Unity, and then it just runs through and imports and creates all of the objects. So here, if I come back over to Unity and I wait for it to compile my changes. All right. And so if I come up here to tools, which you can't see because it's off the screen, but here we have the card importer that I had previously created, and now our enemy importer. And so with the enemy loader, you tell it where your JSON is located. You tell it what the output folder is that it should create the enemies into, and then you create the enemies from the JSON. And that runs through and creates all of those scriptable objects based on the information in the JSON. So if I come down here and I look at resources, here are my enemy scriptable objects that I have set up. And if I look at a skeleton here, we can see that the armor is 0, the health is a minimum 5, maximum 15. There's our damage sets, favorite action, and then here's a link to the prefab. And if I hit that, I can see, okay, right here is the skeleton. And those prefabs are over here in our prefabs enemies. And I just copied these from the Synty asset pack that we're using. So this way they're in a known location that I don't have to worry about changing. And so great, I've got all that hooked up, but we're not actually spawning anything. So if we come back to Visual Studio Code, I did create also a class wrapper for these. In Unity, a scriptable object is going to have a set values to it. So like the skeleton's values are set, which is why I set the minimum and the maximum. With the class wrapper, I can randomly select a number between 5 and 15 for the health. And so that way, the enemies will not all have the same amount of health, they will have different amounts when they are spawned. Excuse me. So, moving on, I need to be able to spawn these. And I believe my best route will be, let's have a quick little conversation here with ChatGPT. Now that we have the ability to create SOs for the enemies, and we have a class wrapper, we need to spawn them into the level. Within our level is a collision detector that will trigger combat. I want to add a script to the object that will spawn enemies at start. I want the script to have variables for adjusting the difficulty, a list of enemies that can be spawned based on the scriptable objects found in the assets, resources, enemies folder, with the ability to turn on and off the enemies for each spawner object. I also want a variable to identify how many of each enemy can be spawned, along with a total amount of enemies that can be spawned. So let's see what we get. Now I am using the GPT-5 API from OpenAI to help me with my coding. As a solo developer, I need to be able to iterate a lot faster. I could easily just write all this code myself, spend a couple of weeks figuring out how to do it, what I want it to do, write it, test it, debug it. Maybe I could do it in a week, but I also have a full-time job and a family, and I'm in a master's degree program, so I don't have that kind of time. So I have found that GPT-5 is very good at helping me write the code that I want, as long as I know what to ask for. If I don't know what I want created, then it's going to be a real challenge. And you have to do a lot of refactoring, a lot of iterating. But when I take a moment to think about what I want and then I really articulate that, then I can get some pretty good results. So it's created an enemy spawner. I'm going to save this. And the first thing I want to do is I want to read over what it's done here. So added a configurable enemy spawner, uses your enemy SO assets in the enemy instant wrapper. That's great. New component enemy spawner, attach it to a game object in your level, spawns enemies at start. Wonderful. Spawn settings, difficulty offset, shifts rolled stats via enemy instance, example, +3 for harder, -3 for easier. That is what we have set up in our enemy instance wrapper. So OpenAI took a look at the enemy instance, and so that it knew what it was going to do, and then added that in to the spawner to take into account. So it's really good at looking at your different code files, understanding what's in them, and what needs to be incorporated to make the connections work. Spawn points, trap swarm optional if provided, spawns at these positions, rotations by index. Otherwise spawns around the spawner with small offsets. Oh, good, because that was something I was going to ask for and I forgot to. When I'm spawning in this content, I don't want all the enemies to just stand right on top of each other. I want to spawn them in within this array, within this box, but I want them to spawn spaced out a little bit. So I'm glad that it considered that for me. Spawn parent, optional parent transform for organizing spawned enemies. Enemy options, auto-populated from resources enemies. A list of spawn option entries the enemy SOs referenced. Enable toggle per spawner. Good. Max count. How many instances that enemy SO this spawner can create. Excellent. Use the context menu on the component to refresh options from resources. Oh, good. I was wondering about that. On start, builds a pool of available enemy SOs, repeated up to each option's max count, randomly picks up to the total spawn count from that pool. For each pick, creates an enemy instance with the difficulty offset, instantiates the prefab from the enemy SO, names the instance after the rolled enemy's name. Spawner assumes your enemy SO prefab field is assigned. Yes. If not, it logs a warning and skips that entry. Cool. If you want to hand off the rolled stats to a runtime component for the spawn prefab, enemy stats, combatant component, I can add small bridge script. Not at this time. You can place multiple enemy spawner objects with unique option toggles. That's what I wanted. And a simple gizmo view is included. Good. I love having gizmos so that I can see what's where. Want to wire the collision detector to disable spawning. Oh, yeah. When triggered or to trigger combat after spawn. Yes, we need to disable the collision detector. You know, I'm not gonna say that right now. I want to handle that separately. Spawn will only take place at level start, so I don't need to disable anything there. And then we would disable the collision detector when combat ends on that detector. At the moment, you don't have the ability to run away, but in the future, that may be a feature that we want. So I don't want to have different pieces of code handling that. I want the combat text, the combat system to be able to disable that. So if you run away in the middle of combat, you come back, it's still going to trigger on you. So let's take a look at the code we got. We've got this enemy spawner here, mono behavior, spawn settings, shift stats up down based on difficulty offset, good. Total spawn count 3, total number of enemies the spawner should create, optional explicit spawn points. All right. Spawn parent and options list, spawn options. Spawn option enemy enabled, max count, reset it, unvalidate, on start, refresh options from resources, good. Build the pool, enable options and per enemy maxes. Pick a random index and remove from pool to respect per enemy maximums, good. Roll stats and initiate the prefab. Excellent. Get the spawn pose. Refresh options from resources. If Unity editor and if set dirty. On draw gizmo selected. Okay. So this has already been saved. I am just going to do a, oh, nothing to save. Cool. Let's take a look at Unity and let's see what we got. So if I come up here to encounter 1 and let's just see where our spawner is. Did it put it here? It did. So ChatGPT put it right where it's supposed to be. And let's drop this in and take a look at what we got. Okay, so now we got our little gizmo showing up. Good. And let's see what our settings are here. Difficulty offset 0. That's just fine. Total spawn count. Let's do 2 just to see something's different. Spawn points, options. Okay, so we got 15 elements here. Now it didn't, okay. So that's one thing to change, I think. Well, no, it's just, I don't want Dark Lords here. I don't want the demons. I don't, okay, so one thing I need to do is if I come back here to the code. All right. This is great. Please set the enabled flag on the list of prefabs that could be spawned to not to disabled or not checked by default. This way I have to manually enable the ones I want to spawn. And let's see what that's going to give us. Because I don't want to have to go through and disable all the enemies all the time just so that I can add in 1 or 2 or 3. Perfect. And I know I could have just edited that myself, but I wanted to test it out. So let's keep those changes. All right, that is done. I am going... No, I did not want to save as. Save that. And switch back over here to Unity. Let it redo its thing. All right. And let's check one down here. So this is still set. All right. Now, if I right click, I can reset. And let's see what we get now. Spawn points options. All right, now they're all disabled. Excellent. Exactly what I wanted. Let's drop down here. Witch, Skeleton Ranger, Skeleton Light Armor, Skeleton Heavy, Skeleton Flesh, Skeleton. I want to enable the skeleton with a max count of 2. You can spawn up to 2 skeletons here. And then everything else is going to be disabled. Perfect. So now if I hit play, what are we going to get? Okay. We got 2 skeletons spawned on top of the one we already had. Perfect. Now their position is off. They're not spawned down onto the ground. So that's something that I can adjust. They're not facing the player, which that's fine. I do need to add in a way to set the rotation. So that's something I'm gonna have to think about how I would want to describe that, what feature I'd want to implement in order to set that rotation. But first of all, let's stop this. And then I want to Come back here to my code. The enemies spawned as they should, but they were hovering in the air instead of standing on the ground. Now let's take a look at what we got. So position, snap position to ground. Ground check height. Spawn point offset. Okay, that's good. Let's keep this. Save it. Let it reload. And let's see what happens. All right. Now they're standing on the ground. That's great. Now, one thing is that they are not spawning inside the encounter spawner that they're spawning from. So let's modify that too. That fixed it. I don't know if I need to provide feedback or not. I'm playing it safe. However, the spawned objects are not children of the parent spawner object. I would like them to be nested under. That having them nested under will ensure that they get incorporated into the combat system that is iterating over each of the enemies underneath the collision box. So there we've got a little chunk of code added to set up the spawn parent. All right, let's keep that. Save. And yeah, I know I need to just hit Control S to save. Let it reload. And then I want to hit play. All right. Yeah, that didn't work. I mean, it did work. If I look over here, I can see that the two skeletons are underneath the encounter one, which is exactly where they're supposed to be. Unfortunately, the skeletons scaled dramatically. So that's interesting. Now, they're also probably not incorporated into the gameplay yet. So if I walk into this combat zone, here you can see I only have one enemy popping up. Let's just kill him really quick. Oh, 20 health instead of... Okay, somebody's been playing with the enemy health. Or else the skeleton healed itself. Alright, gain 5 armor and heal for 5. Nope, I don't want that. Deal 5 to all enemies. Nope. Deal 4. Deal 2 3 times. Okay, that'll give me my best chance at inflicting some damage here. And then end turn. Well, looks like the game's broken now. That's cool. So it didn't work. I mean, it did work, but it didn't work. We're getting close to where we want. I do wonder, though, why did the gameplay change? Now, I've got other students in the class who are collaborating on this project, and so I know one of them was making some edits to the combat system, and so I may have discovered a bug in some of their edits. So there's 10 health. I've got 40. We're keeping these little entry characters really low health so that we can go through quickly and test things out. So yeah, see there, it's adding whatever damage is supposed to be added to the enemy. It is not adding it in it's not subtracting the health, it's adding to the health. So something got switched in there. If I end turn, okay, so it is working. I did find a bug in there. Deal 4 damage twice, apply bleed 4. All right, let's slap this on here. And so there, the health of the enemy increased. But yet it's resetting down to a lower value, but then it kicked up to 1. So there's definitely something going on there in the code that I'm going to have to take a look at. Something's not working right there. I don't believe it is connected to my work, but I'm going to be just taking a look at it to be safe. Something to look into. Now, every time it spawns, it is spawning with its scaling off. Actually, I want to take a look at that. And let's see what's going on. Do you recommend a beginner to learn Unity using ChatGPT since your tutorial doesn't cover everything? I would say using ChatGPT as a beginner, if you're a beginner to learning C#, you will be able to do stuff, but you're going to struggle. You're going to have a lot of challenges with, like for instance, right now, I've got something's going wrong. It's not working the way it's supposed to. How do I solve that? I know how to code, and so I also know how this game has been built. And so it's easier for me to debug it and figure out what's causing the problems. Okay, so yeah, you know how to code. So then if you know how to code already and you are new to Unity, yeah, I would definitely be using ChatGPT to help you out. It helps me a lot with just getting the syntax and knowing which methods need to be called to accomplish different things. I do spend a lot of time reading through the code that it generates so that I understand what it's doing. That serves multiple purposes. For one, it helps me learn as I'm going along. It also makes it easier for me with debugging. Yes. Okay, so you just joined into the chat and you missed my earlier work where right here I have been chatting with ChatGPT to generate this code for this spawner that I'm currently working on. So for the past 6 weeks, I've been working pretty heavily using OpenAI's ChatGPT 5 API integrated into Visual Studio Code, and it has been amazing. Version 4 definitely had issues. Version 5, I'm having no issues at all. And it is able to read across multiple code files to understand the relationships between my objects and know where it needs to make edits. It has been amazing. With one prompt, I was able to create a music player that lets me have multiple music tracks, blend in between them, loop the whole thing. I mean, it was just one prompt. I had written that code in the past, so I knew what to expect. But it was pretty cool. The only difficulty I've had is setting up the prompt correctly. So knowing what I want it to create and giving it everything all at once. Some people prefer to do iterative increases, add a feature, add a feature, add a feature. I like to try to tackle it all at once. That wasn't something you could do with GPT-4, but GPT-5 is really good at identifying all of your requests, and then it builds a task list, and it just works through each task going through. It's pretty impressive. It does run a little bit slower. I could switch my agent to GPT-5 Mini, and it would run faster, but it doesn't do the deep thinking that AI5 does. Now, if I switch back here to the other game engine. As I was saying, I'm not sure why my skeletons are spawning so big. All right, I want this. What do I have to do to get down? That's important, for example, like player movement. So like with player movement, if you want the player to just move around, my first go-to is always the Unity third-person controller. It's free on the Unity Asset Store. You just pop it in, you throw it onto your character. Now you've got camera and you've got movement, and then you can use an AI engine to add additional features into it. There are some really good YouTube videos on working with the third-person controller and expanding it. And then I personally also use a different ultimate character controller, I believe that's what it's called, that has first and third person functionality really, really well. So I was wanting to look at this skeleton that it spawned here. Is there any position, rotation, scale is set to 1, and of course my camera view is just blocking that off. Let's just hide that really quick. Yep, scale of 1. So I got to figure that one out. Spawning random objects is important to learn too, and dragging objects with the mouse. Yeah. So it's good to, let me just quit out of here. Whoops, it helps my mouse is in the right spot. Definitely you want to be able to just learn the basics of Unity. I would say before diving in with an AI tool and building something out, I would just start with a introduction to Unity tutorial. There are some really good ones. And just learn how to navigate the system, how to move characters around, how to place them in, and placing is just drag and drop. You can select it down here in your assets, drag it in. You can right click and then create any object from here. There's prefab stuff you can do. Prefabs are really good to learn. If you already know how to program, then on Unity's website, they have some really great ebooks on doing patterns and practices and working with scriptable objects. Once you get all the common things to learn, then it should be a breeze making anything in Unity. Yeah, so I wouldn't say a breeze. A lot of people think that game development is really easy, and it's not. It's really hard. There is so much work that goes into building a video game. But that said, you learn the basics of Unity and you add in GPT-5 or Claude or even Grok for helping with the coding, you can really start producing something really fast. In this case, I mean, this is a big complex level. I didn't make it. I purchased the Synty asset pack, and then I just loaded up their demo level. For this class I'm working on, we had to build a functional game within 4 weeks. And now we are in the second 4 weeks where we're polishing it up and adding more functionality. And so we just went with stock Synty content so that we could, if I zoom out here, this is pre-built by Synty, comes in their asset pack. And so that way we didn't have to waste time building out this massive level. And instead we got to focus on the functionality of the game, making the cards for the game. And there's a couple of us in the class that are already pretty experienced with Unity and just moving content around, creating basic games, writing code for it. So that has definitely helped us accelerate our work. Yes, I am a seasoned, I've been working in IT for 30 years now. Did software system automation for Microsoft. I have a degree in computer science for programming. Now I am a cybersecurity professional, so IT is my background. I've been studying game design off and on as a hobby since I first learned to code in 1989, 88. I was reverse engineering games on the Apple IIe so I could learn to code. But Unity was completely new to me. I spent, I think, 5 years studying Unreal Engine and playing around with Unreal Engine. And then I started this master's degree program and switched to Unity because the school used Unity. And so I've been using Unity for the past 2 years now. Leet code. Oh, I hate leet code. Unfortunately, I have heard in the non-game design world, yeah, exactly. Everyone hates leet code. In the non-game design world for programming positions, I've heard leet code is used heavily. I personally don't see the point in leet code. Okay, great. You're showing that you can code. You're showing that you can problem solve. That's good, but that's what an entry-level developer does. An advanced developer is going to be looking at patterns and practices. And that was something that I didn't understand until I worked at Microsoft. And I was in an advanced team, and they just really drilled that into me that, yeah, you can write code and you can write monolithic code where everything's just in one big script file, one big code file, but that's not how you build software. You need to be doing object-oriented programming. You need to be leveraging patterns, following good practices. So that's really what I emphasize now. And when I'm interviewing a developer at my organization where I work, I will have them do a logic problem-solving problem where they have to write code. And if they struggle with it, that's going to be a problem. But then once they're finished with it, I tell them to optimize it. And that is a big red flag, is if you ask somebody to optimize some code you had them write, and then they ask why it just works or for what purpose. You always optimize. You always want to make it better. You want to make it run faster. And especially if you're doing game design, you need speed and performance. So you need to be prepared to optimize. It's harder than me finishing my contract list quiz. Yeah. I'm more interested in what the person knows how to accomplish. I do a brain teaser. The one that I tend to use is pretend that you work at NASA and NASA has built a train track encircling Mars, and you need to land. NASA has placed 2 rovers on the train track. Write code that links them together. And the train track completely encircles Mars. So if one of the cars is moving forward, it's just going to keep on moving forward. Yes, I have done a lot of interviews. I've interviewed software developers, database designers, server administrators, help desk support staff. Yep. In terms of leak code, I know a lot of people really like to use that as a question system for interviewing. I don't. I use my problem that I use because it makes people think outside the box, think of it in a world that's completely different, and they can use whatever code they want. But I don't get into the nitty gritties. Like I was talking to one person and they're like, yeah, was asked to do a double linked list. And it's like, no, why would you do a double linked list? That's not a good programming challenge to ask during an interview. It's not practical. There's plenty of examples on how to do that. Anybody can go pull that up in 5 minutes. So it's not a good test of your thinking abilities. Yeah, I've taken a look at leak code a couple times. Some of them I was able to solve no problem at all. And then some of them I'm like, I would never ask somebody to do this. So what's the value in it? I don't know if leak code is used by game design companies. That is not something that I know. Huh. Yeah, I agree. It would be diabolical. I mean, especially, Unity yeah, I want you to do visual scripting in Unreal Engine to solve this leak code problem. Really? That doesn't sound like a lot of... It doesn't get you anything. As a hiring manager, I want to know how capable this person is. I don't want... No. It doesn't tell you. That's my opinion. I don't like leak code. All right. I don't know why this... Oh, look at that. Okay. So it is scaling. Now I'm figuring something out. I don't know why FANG companies are doing this. So the FANG companies, the Facebook, Amazon, Google, the big ones, Microsoft, they are looking at, for any position that they have open, they'll potentially get 1,000 applicants. And so they are using automation to weed out the resumes. And then they are using leak code to further weed out the entry-level developers to identify who are the top 50 out of that 1,000 that applied that we need to follow up with. So while I disagree in the system, that's kind of the reason they're doing it. They've just got so many applicants, they need ways to filter them out. So here I can see that basically overrated's right. Yeah, the big companies. I will say, I don't know what it's like to work at one of the big companies today. I worked at Microsoft from 97 until around 2005, 2006. Back then, I learned more working at Microsoft than I did in my undergrad degree. And no, leak code was definitely not a thing back then. My first interview with them was 2 hours long because I was interviewing for a temp contractor position. And when I transitioned that into full-time, it was a 4-hour interview. Half of it was technical coding on a whiteboard, and half of it was just logic trick questions. One of my favorite was, you're looking at a picture of a bus. What direction is the bus going? And you have to just talk out loud about what your thought process is, asking what different elements you see in the picture to try to identify movement. Ultimately, it boiled down to, you can't see the door. So therefore, the bus is moving to my left. And I'm looking at the side of the bus that doesn't have a door on it. Yeah, technical coding interviews were definitely there. Just not the whole leak code thing. That came in a lot later. Okay, so when, oh no, that's not what, Control Z that. All right, let me come back to this box. So what I noticed here is when I scale the box, the enemy is also, the object inside is also scaling. So what I need to do is figure out how to unlink the characters underneath so that I can rescale the box and not rescale the characters inside. So what I'm going to do for that, I'm going to wait a moment. And I'm just going to pop open ChatGPT here. I have a couple, let's see, I'm going to actually set this up. You are an expert Unity game developer. I am also, I have a problem I need help with. I have a collision box in a game that has several enemy character objects within. When I resize the collision box, the sub objects also resize. Is there a way to decouple this? Bum 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 ba-dum bum. Don't parent the enemies under the volume. Yeah, I know, but I kind of want to. Okay, so I'm gonna have to. So that means I need to rethink my code logic, because what I'm doing, the encounter has this trigger script on it, and the trigger script is firing with the box collider, and then I also have my enemy spawner. But if I want to decouple it, then I can throw the event, and then the enemy spawner can be separate from the encounter box. So then I can resize the encounter box, have the enemy spawner separate. Okay, I can do that. So what I'm going to do then is I am going to create empty spawners. And then I am going to create empty and encounter one. And then I want to add my spawner code to encounter one. Come down to my skeleton. I want to turn you on, and I want two. And then I'm going to come back up here to encounter one, and I am going to remove the enemy spawner from this, and shrink this back down to about where it's supposed to be. And now, if I hit play, I should have 3 skeletons, and they shouldn't be scaled up huge. Okay, it spawned 1 in the back a ways. But that's it. And I know why that's it. So let's first of all, let's move this spawner because it is back too far. And so let's move the spawner up here. That looks better. Now I want a total spawn count of 2. And then the skeleton enemy is max count of 2. Ground offset, ground mass layer, everything. Okay, so that looks good. Let's just save. Play. All right, now I've got 2 spawned. Excellent. That looks much better. And they're the correct size because it's been decoupled from the encounter box. All right, so makes the game a little more difficult from a coding standpoint. If I want to spawn enemies and trigger collision, I need to have 2 different objects in the game. I'll have to think about that. I don't like to have to do so much work, but I have a functional spawner at this point. I think I am going to come in here and let's set the enemy rotation. I need the ability to specify the rotation so that I can control the direction the enemies are looking when spawned into the level. Thoughts? How could I best address this? Let's see what GPT has. This game is your assignment. It is my assignment. So I'm in a master's degree in game design program. When I entered the program, I had about half the skills I needed for doing game design. I had already been working in Unreal Engine for a while, but I wanted to fill in those gaps because I'm launching my own studio. And yep, it's a fully online program through Lindenwood University. I love it. It's a great program. I've learned so much. This is a team studio class, so there are 8 of us collaborating on this game. We all have different skill sets, though, so there's different amounts of progress. Oh boy, it wrote more code than I was expecting. Dun, dun, dun. Use spawn point rotation only when mode is use spawn point rotation. Otherwise, compute custom rotation. All right. And then compute rotation for position. Compute rotation for position. Rotation mode. Keep only y-axis rotation from spawner. Face on horizontal plane. Random yaw. Use spawn point rotations per enemy. Add 2 child transforms to spawn points and rotate them in scene. Or expose rotation controls on the spawner. I added flexibility. Flexible rotation now works. The spawn point is used. And rotation mode is use spawn point rotation. Its rotation is applied. Otherwise, rotation is complete. Okay, so let's keep this. Let's save it. And then let it recompile. Dun, dun, dun. Right. Helps if mouse is in the right place. Okay, now rotation. But see, there's no indicator to show me the current direction it's looking. Snap to ground, check height, rotation control, use spawn point rotation. Freshman College of Engineering, Computer Science. Cool. I highly recommend CompSci. It gives you a really good foundation in programming and software development. At this point in time, I don't really recommend game design. When COVID first started, everybody went home and everybody started playing video games. So the investors came into the games industry and just flooded the games industry with money. Lots of indie studios started up. Lots of AA and AAA companies greatly expanded. Lots of games started being developed. And then schools also started cranking out a lot of people with skills in game design. Then COVID came to an end and everyone went back to work. And now the number of people playing games has dropped. It's higher than the pre-COVID numbers, but it is not high enough. So there have been mass layoffs over the last 2 years. We're looking at like 20,000 unemployed in the game design world, and there's like 200 jobs worldwide. So 20,000 people applying for 200 jobs. It is not a good game. It's not a good market right now for employability. That's one of the reasons why I'm launching my own studio. Game design has been a passion of mine forever. And I have a full-time job that pays really well. And so I'm doing game design on the side in the evenings and the weekends to build and launch games under my studio. And if I get lucky and some of my games make some money, maybe I can quit my day job and turn my studio into my career. But otherwise, I'm not quitting my current job because I'm not going to get employed by some studio, especially at my age. Now, if you do the CompSci, get that degree, and then you start learning Unity or Unreal Engine on the side, and you build a portfolio around that, then you could have a good skill set to get hired. Programmers are going to be needed a lot, especially with generative AI being such that it is. Entry-level content creators are really going to have a hard time. I don't use AI for generating images, music, sound effects at this time. I'm using assets that I have purchased or are freely available because I'm supporting that community. But I am using AI for code generation. Yeah. Getting the master's degree, I was really surprised when I enrolled in the master's degree program here. A master's degree is really different from a bachelor's degree. There is a big emphasis on research and researching topics that will add value to the community. So a lot of paper writing, a lot of research. And I was a little concerned that that wasn't really going to help me grow as a game designer, but I was wrong. It is so helpful. Bachelor's GEs is so annoying. What's a GE? General education, like biology and math and general education. Yeah, I can see that. I will say, let me think. Psychology is a really good class for game design, so that you can understand player motivations better and how to play on those motivations. Sociology for understanding how the community works. And so then when you're designing communities within your games, sociology could be useful there. History is always good for game designers. When I got my bachelor's degree, math was a really big deal. And the truth of it is, I don't think I used anything I learned once I graduated when it came to math. So take that as it is. Calculus 1, Calculus 2. I had to take Calculus 1. I did not have to take Calculus 2. My son is in a honors Calculus 1 class in high school, and geez, I have forgotten everything about math, so I am not able to help him one bit. He's smarter than me, though. Okay, I've got my spawner working. The code on the encounter is, math doesn't really apply that much to software engineering, maybe game dev, if I'm right. Maybe, but with generative AI changing the world the way that it is, you can also just ask generative AI how to compute something and it will write the algorithm for you. Provided that somebody has already written the algorithm and it's consumed that knowledge. That's one thing a lot of people don't understand about generative AI and large language models is how they work. And especially if you're going into comp sci, I really encourage you to understand how LLMs work. They consume tons of information and then use statistical probability to identify what the next word is in the sentence. So it's not that they are intelligent. It's not that they can comprehend things. It's looking at if you just wrote once upon a, what is the next word? Time, because you're writing a story and stories start with once upon a time. And so the ChatGPT or whichever AI engine is just looking at what's the statistical probability that this is the next word that you're looking for. That's where giving the AI engines context is important, so it knows where to apply its statistical probability. But also because of that, the current versions of AI systems, the generative AI based on large language models, can't be evolved into a artificial general intelligence, or AGI, which is the next holy grail level. OpenAI's Sam Altman wants to say that AGI is right around the corner, but he's saying that just because he's trying to fulfill a contract obligation he has with Microsoft, not because they are actually about to achieve it. But that said, AI is changing the world because generative AI is really impressive what it's capable of doing. So there's going to be a lot of unemployment in the very near future. Game industry, software development, the people who know how to use AI effectively to get more work done will be the ones who are employed. So computer science will still be a good field to be in because you got to write the code to build these systems. On the other hand, my daughter switched from getting a degree in business and marketing to pre-law because the marketing industry is about to be destroyed by AI. So I've got my spawner, and I do want to test it a little bit more. Yeah, these AIs is right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a second spawner, encounter 2, and I want it under my spawners. And then I just realized I really need to create a prefab for this. So I can just drop the prefab in instead of always applying this script. And I'm going to say that I want to spawn 5 enemies. And let's spawn 1 demon, 2 skeletons maximum. And And let's add in one skeleton heavy armor and one skeleton light armor. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No. Actually, I want to add in more enemies than all right, let's see if this works. So I have said that it can spawn many enemies, but I'm only going to allow for 5 total spawn count because I want to make sure that that code is working. This way, if I have multiple enemies enabled, but I have limited it to 5 spawns, it will randomly select. So when the player replays this level in the future, they play it through it once, they get one set of enemies. They play it through a second time, they get another set of enemies. Perfect. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm pretty sure I have 5 in there. One, 2, 3, 4. Did it only spawn 4? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Yep, 5. One sitting on top of another skeleton. Good. That's exactly what I wanted. 5 enemies spawned. And it drew from the pool of available enemies. That's what I wanted. So then I know that's working. My next step that I will tackle tomorrow, or maybe tonight, I gotta get some other stuff done first though, is I'm going to be hooking up these newly spawned enemies to the combat system so that when I enter the combat zone, it will actually trigger and I'll be fighting with whatever was dynamically spawned instead of the ones that I manually placed. So thank you for checking in, for watching my show. Thank you, Frosty F4. See you later.